Alrighty friends, I got the new turbo today. Just came in. There you go. VS Racing 88-103. Pretty big turbo. Hopefully I don't have an issue spooling this thing, so we'll play with it and see what we got. It's a T6 flange, 88-103. Should be pretty good to make a whole lot of power. So other than that, I'm starting the day with a list. I made a list because my brain is starting to get a little bit scrambled on what all needs to get done because I'm waiting on parts and some parts are here, so there's some things I want to finish up, so let's get through the list. I'd like to start the day by getting a lot of the stuff underneath the truck done, like the trans brake wiring, so that stuff's all plugged in, and then painting the front drive shaft and installing the shaft. So let's start there, then we can get the drive shaft in. So I got the other half of the shaft painted, and I have the rear speed sensor plugged in, and you can see the shielded wire is the Terminator X wiring, and then the purple wire is the factory speed sensor wire. So I spliced the factory speed sensor signal wire into the Holley plug on the end. So essentially now I have speed signal going to Terminator, and I have the speed signal going to the stock computer to run the gauges and everything else. The pink wire here was added to the Terminator X harness. That pink wire is going to be the trigger for the trans brake. And what I did was I ran the pink wire back through the harness, and then I connected the pink wire to that green and black wire, which used to come from the stock computer for the speed sensor. So that purple wire is the signal going back, and now I'm going to be using the green wire for my trans brake. So the reason I chose to do that is because the green wire was already ran through the factory harness, so then I don't have to add another wire. So there was already a wire there not being used, so I just decided to use that. And because this is a Holley and factory ECU integration, I have my factory ECU right here. So all I did was I snipped the green wire out of the ECU plug. Now I'll be able to connect this to the Holley to trigger the trans brake. So I'll get started working on that. So essentially what I'll do is I will hook a relay up to that wire, so the relay will pass a positive through it, and then I'll be using a negative trigger from the Holley. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my cruise control button to activate trans brake because it's running on the Holley, so it doesn't have cruise control anymore. So I'm going to use this guy to activate the brake. So when I push that button, it sends a positive signal to a plug that's in here. So what I'll do is I'll send that positive to an input on the ECU. Positive will be used to activate my rev limiter, and then I'll set up a custom input so the trans brake is activated when rev limiter is on and speed is below like 1 mile or 2 mile an hour. That way I can't accidentally activate the trans brake when I'm driving, because I do have other GM vehicles and I use the cruise control on them, so I could see that actually becoming an issue. Like if I'm groggy, not thinking about it, driving this thing back from the track someday or whatever, and you just muscle memory go to put cruise control on, I don't want to hit that button and then activate trans brake. So I'll have a speed condition on there also. Okay, so I have the fuse box pulled out. The blue wire that comes out of the top right terminal, that wire is actually going to be for the momentary switch on the cruise control button. So this gray one down here, this one is actually for the on-off switch, and that one gives it constant power all the time, and then this one's momentary. So I have the multimeter hooked up, and I can show you the function, and it does work with the keyed 12 volt, so it has to be forward. So the switch is off, and that's pushing the button. You can see switch off, and I push the button, it doesn't change. But now I will flip the switch, and then I push the button, and I get 12 volts. So momentary cruise control button gives me 12 volts on the blue wire. So essentially I'll kind of have two safeties. I'll have the speed, and then I'll have the switch here. So I'll have to select this to be able to do the trans brake. Then I can just turn it back off. And it's also keyed 12 volt. So this gray wire here, I don't actually need this for anything. So I'm just going to tape this wire back up. And then I'll add a relay to this wire here. So this will send a 12 volt to the Holley, and then this will activate my rev limiter, and it'll activate the brake output. The output will come out of here, and then it'll go to a relay, and then this will be a ground output. It'll activate the relay, and it'll pass 12 volt to the shift solenoid. I'm going to do a little bit of research on how much those shift solenoids draw. I might even be able to use this here to feed the power to the relay, but if not, I'll probably just go to one of the switch 12 volt positive wires that's open down here. So I could probably just go to like one of these, this little pink wire here that's open. There's a whole bunch of them because I removed all of it from the factory harness. So I got the relay all in there, wired up, the trans brake tested, and it works. Instead of showing it inside the box, I'll probably just do it with a different relay. Might be a little bit easier to understand. So what I ended up doing was using a ground trigger from the Holley, and then this wire going out to trigger the trans brake solenoid. And then I just twisted these two together So I have positive coming from here. So you're going to have a positive, that's your source, which gets passed through the relay here and then goes to the trans brake. And then the other positive is the opposite side of the coil. So you got a positive here, coil gets activated here. That's how I hooked it up. So when I push the button, it sends a 12 volt to the Holly, and then it outputs a trans brake signal, which grounds the relay, and then it passes through 12 volts to the trans brake solenoid. If you guys don't really understand relays, you probably thought that was a really shitty description on how I hooked that thing up. I have like an oversimplified view of how a relay works, so I don't really get too hung up on like 87, 30, 85, 86, and what is what. I kind of just look at it as there's two paths on the relay, and polarity doesn't matter. So for the sake of this, I removed the middle 87A. We'll just pretend it's a 4-post. That's kind of how people use them most of the time anyways. So I look at it like this. The tab is in the back. I always use the one in the back as like the source from whatever power, and that's what's going to be passed through the relay to the front. So back is where it's coming from. Front is what it's going to. Those don't even matter. You could go in the front and out the back here. And then your other circuit, this could be a ground, this could be a positive, this could be a ground, this could be a positive. Doesn't matter. If you're looking at the front of it, the sides are your coil. You activate the coil, and then you pass through the circuit this way. So that's just how I always do it. I just look at like the orientation of the relay. So back to front is what I'm going to pass through, and then side to side is what I'm going to use to activate the coil. One side has to be positive, one side has to be negative. Close that circuit, and then it passes through the relay. I'll just show you real quick how I have this thing set up. So rev limit 1 is enabled, and then if I go into I/O for outputs, I have a trans brake out ground enabled. So if I go into configure, this will come on. It'll have the trans brake output when rev limiter 1 is enabled, and the speed is below 2 miles per hour. So then in my input, I have my rev limiter 1 input, which is a 12 volt input. And then trans brake out is a ground. So when rev limit 1 is on and mile per hour is below 2 miles per hour, it'll give me my trans brake ground out. And then it activates the trans brake. I'll set you guys underneath the transmission so you can hear the solenoids activating. So I can hear them actually working, so that should be good. The reason I set it up like that is because I'm not planning to bump at all, so it's just gonna be a brake on off. I don't really need it to bump. So looking at the list for the day, I got the brake wiring done and I set it up in the tune. I painted the drive shaft, I installed the shaft, and then I put the transmission dipstick in. That was kind of a nightmare trying to get that thing in. I ended up having to take the cross member back off, unbolt it, and then lower the back end down in order for me to get the transmission low enough to get the dipstick high enough. But it's all in place, and I did start eyeballing the crossover and the turbo kit. So I do have the Fowler Performance driver's side V-band there. It's a really nice piece, 2 1/4. Bolted that thing on so I can start mocking up the crossover. I do have the manifold, not finished welded, still tacked, but I just bolted it on so I can start to eyeball some stuff. So for the crossover, I'm going to end up coming down in front of that little ear on the transmission and behind this little torque arm for the front diff. And then I have this big open area right here that I can try to run that 5-inch downpipe through. So there's the manifold all in place. I did take my fender liner out. I have this little 5-inch reducer, and I was just using this to kind of mock up how this thing is going to fit in here. So this is the 5-inch side. So I can snake this thing down in here, and I can get it behind the little ear on the transmission, but it does end up hitting the little bolt that's coming through the firewall for one of the heat shields. But that is a completely round piece. So the idea that I have in my head is to shape this piece and almost make it like a rectangle or a square to try to get it through there. So I know in front of the ear on the transmission I can get the 2 1/4 through, and then I'm going to go behind, and then I'm going to have to shape the pieces. So that's my plan. It works in my head. So we'll see how that goes, if we can actually make that work. So if I can't shape the longer pieces, I even have a thought to do almost like shaped pie cuts, where you could do like a 2 or a 3-inch section, shape it into the shape that you need, and then kind of pie cut a shape section through that to get past the frame and the firewall. So I don't think it'll be too bad, but that'll be in the next video. So thanks for watching. Have a good one.